Hello, everybody. This is Jamie Hope on Signed, Sealed, Delivered, and I'm back with Sean Paul Murphy, a wonderful screenwriter. He's an editor on a TV show on Discovery. He's an author, and I'm telling you what, when I got to read his a book that will be coming out soon, Chapel Street, and I neglected my house when I did because I couldn't put it down. It was so intriguing, and it's based on it's a fictionalized version, but with some elements of truth in it, I believe. But it's something that we're talking about today. And Sean Paul Murphy, if you watch part one, grew up in a haunted house, and I would say it sounds more like you said, a poltergeist or a possessed house. And you guys, you told us about your mom had brought a Ouija board in with a friend to try and communicate with it, and things seemed to uptick. You found yourself out on a ledge of a window a few times at 3 o'clock in the morning, which is very pertinent time. You have a mom and a sister who said that they both saw a cat-like figure coming out of the closet. So we're back to that area. And then your mom didn't she feel, did it ever touch anybody? Did it ever,
Yes, it seemed to touch my mother. She didn't go into a great deal of detail, but it seemed to touch her in a sexual manner in her bed.
Oh.
At this point, she was sleeping in what was my sister's, the master bedroom. So that was, before the Ouija board incident, and I will say that it was already there before the Ouija board. It was already interacting with people. It just wasn't interacting with me, and there was no real experience of it on the third floor that I was aware of. But yes, it would have some sort of experience with my mother. It's one of these awkward things you don't want to press for too many details.
Sure.
My niece Natalie, after her mother died, lived at the house for a while, and she also slept in that room, which used to be her mother's bedroom.
Mm.
And she said that the entity would get into bed with her and like spoon with her.
What would she do? Would she just be so frightened she couldn't move, or would she get out and try to run?
I think she got used to it. In fact, she didn't even mention it in the first interview I did with her. She's like, "Hey, I want to tell you this." She goes, "You were asking me what was the really strange stuff, and I didn't mention this because it happened practically every night, so it was normal."
Did she did she say it in a way that she was almost comfortable with it?
No, she was not comfortable with it.
She just accepted that. How old was she when this was happening?
I guess early teens.
Oh, that is terrifying.
14 area.
Terrifying. Oh my gosh.
One thing we're trying to do is put together a timeline of the events, because it's very difficult because we didn't discuss it with each other at the time. And it's been, since the height of it, it's been 30 years. So
had anybody else, I know you were close with your neighbors, had anybody else experienced any kind of, unusual activity in their house, or did they experience unusual activity at your house?
I don't want to go too far into that because I'm going to be interviewing, so I'm reaching out to some people, but we definitely have anecdotal evidence that it was the neighboring house had the same thing, because at one of the kids was the same age as my youngest brother, and something happened in my brother's room, and the kid just turned to him and said, "It's here too."
Oh, so that's interesting.
My sister and I both have feelings that, independently of each other, that it extended for a couple of houses.
Were you able to do any research to find did you find anything odd about the area at all?
Well, my niece, who is an archaeologist, traced the house back to the American Revolution. Not the house, the property. The house itself was only built in 1915.
Mm-hmm.
The first, to our knowledge, the first structure built on that exact property. The house that was also where the person said it's here too, that house was built at the same time by the same person.
It was back to the Revolutionary War times. What was there anything significant about the property, or was it just in existence?
It was just in existence. It was just a wooded hilltop. It used to be owned by a British ironworks, and after the Revolution, it was seized by the American government, and they sold the property to help pay the soldiers, and then the area really didn't develop until it's in Baltimore now, but it was originally outside the city limits until they put streetcars out that far and they put a bridge over to Hartford Road. And at that point, people started really to develop that area,
Okay.
and then there was a big housing boom after, around the time of World War II. The house I'm living in now was built in 1947, in that post-war boom in this area.
Sure. So did you you had mentioned that these cats were they saw these cats come in, and you said they said they almost looked like something you would see in Egyptian times. Is there anything that you can tie in?
My mother said that. My sister said that isn't her. What she said was more like a leopard.
Okay. And you said you don't have any like read on why that was, though. Like, you don't think that there's any significance there or anything that you can pick up on?
Interestingly, we never had a cat in our house. We never owned a cat. And some of my brother's friends who were casual visitors to the house would sometimes, his bedroom was on the second floor, everybody hang up in his room playing video games and all. They'd go downstairs to the kitchen, and occasionally they would see a cat on the first floor. But this was just a little kitty cat. Oh. But we didn't. They would say, "Hey, you didn't tell me you had a cat." My brother's like, "I don't have a cat."
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So it's interesting that I think that is the only physical manifestation of the entity, because it was not a cat. Mm-hmm. Though interestingly, I found a picture of my sister with a cat outside the house, which I'll put in the next blog. Oh. But we did not have a cat in that house. So any cat that was seen in that house, especially at night, like when these things would happen, I'm hoping to interview one of those people in the next, week or so. Or mm-hmm. And, any cat you saw and it was seen was a physical manifestation of the entity. But
how strange. That is it makes you wonder, why would it choose to, like, this just seems so random, to just appear as a cat. How strange is that?
All I can think of is, like, they say that witches would use cats as...
That's what I thought. Do you know much about the woman who died in the house before you guys bought it?
I know she was never married. None of the family that lived there is totally extinct. And, it was originally a mother and a father. The mother died before they moved into that house. They had 4 children. One of the children died before they moved in. So it was the adult and his second wife, who was the sister of his first wife. They moved in with another sister-in-law and 3 kids. One of the kids married and left but never had kids. The 2 other children stayed in the house. Other relatives would come. A number of people died in the house. But it isn't like they died in any horrible ways or anything. Mm-hmm. I've seen the death certificates, all but one. It's just hard for me to get to the archives to get that final death certificate of the first person who died in the house. But it's sure. There was nothing. I was expecting to find, like, suicide or murder or
sure.
some dementia, but no.
But they didn't. The woman that died. What did you say that? How did she die? She was found on the steps.
Second floor to the platform between the first and second floors.
So, like, did she fall down the stairs?
Yes, she apparently fell down the stairs.
Ooh, now that would make you almost think too, though.
It was pushed.
Yes, that was my first thought when you said that. Like, it just makes you wonder. How long did your family live in that house?
We were there a long time. As mad as it sounds, after a while, you kind of get used to it. I don't think any of us were aware of quite how dangerous it was.
Really?
I didn't put it together. I didn't connect it with my own suicide attempt or with my siblings' successful suicides. I didn't connect it. And it was really only after my sister read my book. She asked to read it, and I gave her a rough draft of it. And then she called for a meeting with me and my other brother to start talking about these events, because she felt that she saw what was real in the book and what wasn't. And mm-hmm. There's the character of the dead brother, who is very much based on my late brother. And I talked a bit about my sister's death in my first book, and I felt I didn't give enough attention to my brother. So I gave him a fictional starring role in my second.
Sure.
But
yeah.
Something happened with my little brother up in the hell room is that And this is what really made me start to look into the whole suicide. He also, like, I would call me climbing out the window suicide events because they were intentional, willful suicides. But had it happened, it would have been suicide. But before I don't know if I even mentioned that to my brother yet. He told me he was in the hell room, and there's this window in the middle of the room off the third floor as well. And there's two mirrors alongside, and then there were some photos. He was looking at some photos up there, and something physically picked him up and threw him hard against the wall.
Like his feet? Did his feet?
His
like,
feet
come
off
up?
the ground and pushed it and threw him against the wall.
Wow.
And he's telling this story, and then he said, had I been 1 foot over in front of the window, I could have died, and everyone would have thought it was suicide because I was like at that age and people commit suicide.
Oh, geez.
And that's what made me think about this. And my sister, in the next blog that comes out, number 18, is going to talk about, a suicide attempt she made in the house too.
Your sister that you're going to be interviewing, you said. Yeah. So you guys all had either attempts on your life, or so with your two siblings that I'm so sorry to hear that happen to. I can't even fathom that. How far apart did that happen? And did they end their lives in that house?
No, my sister died in 1994. At a house about a mile away, maybe a little less.
Okay.
Roselawn Avenue, and my brother Mark died in Flint, Michigan.
Oh, that's less than an hour from me. That's about 45 minutes.
Maybe I'll have to send you down to investigate the place where he killed us.
Yeah.
He died in quite a public way.
Did he really? Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Did you guys at the time, or now even, do you guys think that being in that house had some kind of an impact on them?
We're debating inside about that. I'm going to investigate the deaths further. I've heard some people. My brother was kind of a very gregarious guy, and I heard some stories from some of his friends. People can't reach out to me on Facebook, telling me things, he said, prior to his death or beforehand about the house.
Really?
He was also hearing mimicked voices. He actually lived in the hell room, and he was hearing mimicked voices that preyed on his paranoia.
Now, did he hear them only?
Ill.
What's that?
My brother was bipolar, schizophrenic.
Okay.
Probably because HIPAA laws, they could never tell us what was actually wrong. But he would use those terms. And my sister.
Did he talk about those voices after did he say that he heard those same mimic voices after he left the house ever? Did he ever mention that?
I don't have any. I only know what the people told me. And he said that while he was sleeping up in that room, he would hear my mother and my grandmother talking to him.
Oh, wow.
Talking about and telling them they were going to put him away, which was definitely not the case. So it was definitely preying on his paranoia. But then,
sure.
He was mentally not well. So were they the same kind of voices other people were hearing, or were they just a manifestation of his own illness? Mm-hmm. We're going to look into, and that is, some people are finding these blogs dark about the haunting, and I'm like, and people are saying, well, these are really dark, and I'm like, we haven't gotten to the dark blogs yet.
They're saying then stop reading them. I mean, that's your like, stop. If that's your case, just stop reading them. Why do people always have to have a comment? I mean, this is your life. Like, you guys had to live through this, and it's disturbing someone to have to read about what you walked through. I mean, sorry, I'm not.
No, but it is dark stuff. People can't imagine themselves in the circle. But a number of people are telling me stories that are very reminiscent of what we went through. Name people who lived nearby. And there was one haunting situation the details of it were very similar to what happened in our house. And that took place about 2 blocks away from where we lived.
Interesting. Wow, that's so. It almost makes you wonder if there's something occult like that you guys don't know about that was kind of prevalent in the area. Because sometimes you can hear, sometimes there are occasions where you find out stuff like that. And then what about your sister? You said she was not in the house either.
No, she was at her own home. she shot herself in her basement. And there were she was under stress in her life, and so there were normal circumstances that could explain it. If there is any explanation, things you could say, well, okay, I could see that. We didn't see it coming at all. We were shocked by my sister's death.
Oh man, I'm so sorry. That's awful.
In retrospect, you see warning signs, but at the time,
Sure.
it was shocking. My brother, on the other hand, we knew that was coming eventually.
Sure.
He would go through long periods of being completely lucid when he was on his meds, but it was always just missing a couple days away from madness.
Your sister, did she continue to talk about the house? Do you think that house had like an indelible effect on her?
No, I know she was very interested in the stories we were telling during that brief period when we were talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't remember her saying anything to me about the house. She was more listening than contributing. But I'm going to be talking to her husband soon. Hopefully he's agreed to come in to be interviewed, so I'm sure he'll give us some insight. And he's had his own experiences in the house.
Oh, had he? Now, did your mom, when she sold the house, was there anybody still living there with her?
Yes, my niece Natalie, the daughter of my late sister, lived there. My brother John lived there, and my surviving sister was going through a divorce, and she didn't want to move, and she was going to move in with my mother, but my sister didn't want to move back into that house.
Oh, I don't blame her.
Her daughter, so my mother sold that house, and she bought another house.
Now, how did your mom? Did she continue sleeping in the hell room, or did she ever end up moving out of there?
Only briefly. She moved to the second floor.
Did she?
She moved to the master bedroom, which is probably the second worst room.
Really?
The hell room is probably the worst. The master bedroom is the second worst.
How prevalent was it? Like it was every day, but sometimes it was, somebody different. So maybe it wasn't you every day. Did you guys piece together?
At the height of the haunt, which is, and I hate the word haunting because, as I said earlier,
sure,
it finds a ghost, and it wasn't a ghost. You could tell who it was screwing with because they would be sleeping on the sofa in the living room. So
gee.
Whoever was down in the living room was someone that was driven out of their bedrooms. So, but that was a brief period where it was that intense. Usually it was a very private thing. It only messed with you. And there were times, and it seemed like even at the worst period, it would only mess with one person at a time. It would mess, unless you were two people in the room, then it would mess with both of them. But it would mess with one. It seemed content to drive one person out.
Was there any rhyme or reason behind it, do you think?
No, and I'm just happy that hearing these stories, I'm able to really begin to, I'm trying to look at it like someone would look at an animal species. It's like, what are the attributes? It's the genus. What's the species? And all. And to me, a big breakthrough was whether that it did seem to be more than one entity that manifested itself in different ways. That rather than one entity that manifested itself in many ways, it was at least two. And there were things I was trying to figure out, because it seemed like it only got in bed with females.
Oh, that's interesting.
But unless you count the fact that that snake-like thing that was in my mattress, whether you count that as in bed, but there was nothing sexual. It wasn't touching me. It was moving me, but it wasn't touching me.
Sure.
And also, when I did the initial interviews, it seemed like at first only females heard the voice. You would hear the voice, but not all females. But then I heard that my brother was hearing me mimic the voices as well. So I was trying to think, did this mean it was reacting differently to females than the men?
Yeah, that's interesting. It does. I mean, obviously it seemed to get more aggressive with you guys, obviously putting you out the window, picking your brother up, slamming him against the wall. And with the women, it sounds like it was almost more of a sexual type of thing. Also, too, there was a transactional basis to it as well. If you read my sister's blog, which is number 17, the first one, she's essentially, it offered her power if she would. It what?
It offered her like power,
Really?
psychic power.
So it talked to her.
Not in words. It talked to her in her mind.
But it told. So what was the transaction though? I will give you psychic powers if.
It's like said, I will give you more. Whatever you're experiencing, I can give you more of it.
And did it kind of tell her what did she have? Did she just have to say, okay, give it to me?
Yeah, essentially, yes. And that's what's troubled her for, decades, is that she, a sense of, I'd rather people read her blog and look at it.
Sure.
But
and I'll put it up too. I'll make sure I put the blog up here too, so that everybody can see it.
But
like
my niece had the same thing. Now she never lived in the house. My sister's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
She never lived in the house, but she has also. There definitely seems to be some sort of inherited spiritual gift or psychic gift down the maternal side. My nieces, their mother, my mother, perhaps my grandmother. My mother said that her grandmother was, as they say, born under the veil, which means, this would be the Czech grandmother. And so there seems to be something, and I think the intensity of what you experienced in the house was a part of how, open your words, what level of spiritual awareness you had. It could prey on you more. And I apparently, didn't have that as much of that awareness. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what? So your mom, did she just choose to move? I mean, it seems like she'd been there for a lot of years. It doesn't seem like at that point that's what would have driven her out. But what about your dad? What did he think about it? I know you said the one time he didn't want to talk about it. He what?
He was skeptical of it. That's why my mother never moved, because it's like, we're not just going to move because you're scared of ghosts type of a situation.
Do you think that he saw stuff and just didn't want to admit it, or do you think that he didn't?
I don't think. My father was a workaholic. My father was very career driven. And during the initial years, like the time I lived there, he was very, he wasn't like home for leisure much. And so he did not spend a lot of time at the house awake, and doing things inside the house. But then he had an aneurysm, and I believe 82 or 83. And after that, after my sister's death, he always would drink, but it didn't have much effect on him. And later he became more of an alcoholic. And what really disturbs me is, more stuff I haven't learned, is that sometimes, like, my father would get mad at something he saw on the TV, and he'd talk back to the TV, a bunch of idiots, it's this. He would do that, and we were all familiar with that. But what a couple people in my family have told me, and this came out in the interviews, is that my father began after a while having conversations with something or someone that was not present. And he would always stop. You could hear him, but as soon as they say you'd hear him talking to someone, but it would be low enough that you couldn't hear what he was saying. And if he sensed you were getting close, he would be quiet. But now that's disturbing, because that's not my father. And everybody who was talking about this knew my father's normal behavior, like when he's drunk and he's ranting about something, and they all say this was not that. But what was really disturbing is, as his health declined, he was sleeping on the first floor, but he would walk up to the hell room in the middle of the night, and have conversations with something up on the third floor.
Really? Now, was it a conversation like he was just talking to somebody, or was it more like a fearful thing? Or, I mean, it was just it
was a conversation. He would be talking. He would talk. There would be a pause. He'd talk again, and up on the third floor. And at that point, there wasn't even any furniture up there. The rooms were empty. Of course, that didn't mean you didn't hear if you lived on the second floor. Furniture moving on the third floor, but there was no furniture there. Still hear the furniture moving periodically. So This stuff about my father I find very disturbing, and I always considered my father the third suicide, because he essentially, I love my father, but he drank himself to death, and he just didn't want to stop. And if you lose two kids, my mother had a lot of strength to be able to survive that kind of blow.
Most definitely.
If two kids to suicide, it's devastating. It's devastating to lose two siblings. I can only imagine.
Sure.
his 2 children. And I think my father essentially gave up after that, after my sister died. And, my brother's, he was already wrecked by the time my brother died. I don't think that had as much of an effect on him because he'd already checked out. Though he lived years later, but still, I didn't live that much longer after my brother.
Mm-hmm.
So
now you said that obviously the house was sold, and I even remember when I first started talking to you and I read your book, you said at the time you told me that you had lived in a haunted house, but you definitely, nobody in your family would talk about it, and at that point you wouldn't talk about it. So what changed to make you suddenly feel like you want to start speaking about it, and why wouldn't you want to talk about it back then?
Well, 3 reasons. 1, people would think you're crazy. 2, whenever we were actively talking about it, it seemed to empower it. 3, and this is the real one that worries people, it follows. If you talk about it, it could show up wherever you were. So,
did you just feel that fear of it, or is that like something that would happen?
It's stuff that would happen.
Wow.
Some people have said they've been followed by it. Some people haven't been. My mother was definitely followed by it.
Really? So that is more of a poltergeist, because I know they say poltergeist will follow.
Yeah, but ghosts don't follow.
Right.
Follow. So and 4th, and there was another reason, but that's the main one, is that it would follow, and you'd be considered crazy. So we didn't talk about it. And I talked about it because my mother asked me that question, and I was thinking it's time. And my brother, never got the benefit of, got the benefit of getting the full story. And my sister, when I wrote this book, and when I wrote my book Chapel Street, I was essentially thinking I was done with any reference to the entity on St Helens Avenue. I thought I was done, but when my sister said, "Let's talk about it," I'm like, "Okay, well, if we're going to talk about it, let's talk about it." And another thing that happened is my wife was afraid that it would fall,
Sure.
We have grandchildren here at the house a lot of times, and she didn't want to put them in danger. We had the pastor in my church, Pastor Michael Martin, shout out. And she was expressing her fear to him, and he's like, "Well, Sean, you had these experiences. You should probably write, rather than a fictional piece, like a pamphlet on how to deal with these circumstances. Since you lived through it, you might as well put it to good use." And there's other questions we want to answer. So essentially, I view these blogs are going to be in 4 stages. The first stage is I'm nearly done. It's like the family, history of the house, family experience. Second, I'm going to call in people who are not family members who've had experiences there. Third, I'm going to deal with, and I'm starting to research it now, the deaths in detail, because you're really traumatized by some suicide.
Sure.
And we never really looked into it as much as we should have, and I just want to get more of the details and investigate and really talk to people my siblings may have talked to, and express some stuff that they didn't express to us. And that information is already flowing my way, and I haven't even asked for it yet. And finally, I'm going to want to get a, expert analysis of it. This would be part 4. I'd like to get a knowledgeable Protestant minister, a knowledgeable Catholic priest, and a secular paranormal investigator. And I'm going to draw my own conclusions as well. I've studied this as well, but I want to get all the opinions. And I think really, evangelical thought is not as, is kind of shallow on the subject.
You know what? Actually, up until about a week ago, I always believed the evangelical prevalence of, if it's here, it's demonic, because the old, if you're dead, you're either, in hell or present or with the Lord. And so, absent from the body, present with the Lord. But I talked to a guy named Josh Peck, and he has a show called Into the Multiverse. He is, I mean, he has documentaries. This guy is very well researched. And he brought up in a book that he wrote about the afterlife. I didn't realize this, but the Bible does talk about ghosts in the Bible. There's two specific references to ghosts, and it wasn't demonic. They were ghosts. And back in the times that those accounts were written, in the Old Testament, there was a prevalent belief in ghosts, just, disembodied spirits, not necessarily demonic. I never knew that. And I know the Catholics definitely, there is some, I'm a little murky on it because I'm not well versed, but I do know that they do believe that there can be almost like a purgatory state, or, they can be disembodied or lost, I think. So there is other ideas out there, and there is actually a biblical backing up on that. I'll have to share that with you. I'll have to send you some stuff on it, because I thought the same thing. And when I read that, I was like, no kidding. That makes so much more sense.
Well, I do think, because I had discussions, while they were written discussions with a friend of mine who who's in the deliverance ministry, and I found, some of it was, what they were saying was biblically unsound. And, I just don't think people in modern America, evangelical circles, give the necessary credence to the fact that this is, it's a supernatural, the world, Christianity is a supernatural religion.
Right.
And people don't look at it that way. And my sister made a very good point. I don't know whether it was in part one or in the upcoming part two, is that what she felt about the things in the house was that they had their own world and their own things they were doing, and we were just skimming on the surface of what they were doing. Well,
And Josh actually talks about that too, because he said he used to do like astral. He was into the new age stuff before, and he would do like the astral projecting stuff, and it was legitimate. Like he's not a wackadoo, he's very grounded. And he said there are almost like laws in the spirit world. So when you do that, like you play with the Ouija, you astral project, like he said that he akins it to like you're breaking into their territory, like you're going into, and you're invading their territory. And so then you open up a portal or a doorway for them. And I know that there was stuff there before your mom played with the Ouija board, but it sounds like that's why you always hear there's like an uptick when that happens. So it was really eye opening. So I'm wondering if maybe some of that was going on too.
Well, I'm going to be, I'm trying to take this journey as open-minded as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I think generally in Christianity too, and I don't want anybody to think that I'm some sort of a heretic or I'm out on the edge, but in fact, I was going to write a book about, a nonfiction book about the beliefs that normal American Christians believe about their faith, but and then date those beliefs.
Yes.
So many things that we believe, like most evangelicals are dispensationalist, but the people in the Bible weren't. This is
right.
thing like 150 years old.
Right.
Pentecostalism is close. And like everyone says, well, altar calls are new as well.
Yes.
It's like
absolutely.
One thing and another that people take under the impression that what they believe is the same thing that Jesus taught and the apostles practiced. But Christianity is like a great ship going through the sea, and there's a lot of barnacles attached to it.
Yes, I'm realizing this too. In fact, little fun fact: up until 395 A.D., the church, which was just one church at the time, there weren't all these denominations. There was still only one church, and they still practice all of the Jewish Hebraic, because God said in the Old Testament, when he appointed the feast and holy days, he did it forever. He said, he didn't say until, your Savior comes. He said forever. So the church actually celebrated all of the Jewish feasts and holy days until 395 AD. And then anti-Semitism crept in the church. And then that's when they created Easter in their own days. So just a little fun fact there, just to build on what you were saying. So I agree there.
It's a huge subject, but
yes, it is.
And I think American Christians have lost touch, a lot of it, with the spiritual nature of Christianity. And it's sort of like, you know, even on the most fundamental things, I hear people say all the time that the Bible is the foundation of the church. I'm like, no, it's not. Jesus Christ is the foundation.
Right,
It's the
right.
foundation that builders rejected.
Right.
It's like, people, and the Apostle Paul said is, what we're looking through a glass darkly.
Yes.
And if Paul didn't understand everything,
right.
I don't expect to understand everything.
Sure, absolutely.
That's why I did, when I started to investigate this haunting, it's like, I am just going to talk to people. I'm going to get their experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to look, and I do expect that there would be deception, in the ways people's, that this thing is not revealing itself in a full and open manner in any way.
Right.
And, anything that it reveals is about self, it's doing so for a reason.
Right.
And purpose. So you can't necessarily know it for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm trying to do is to put aside any of my preconceptions. So I'm not prepared to make any statement,
mm-hmm.
Statements of the final conclusions until at least I have all the evidence in. And frankly, it's like, to me, it's like, I do want to go through the depths before I draw conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
And
so that's just giving
this is going to continue to take me months to work my way through.
Sure. And that just gives integrity to the investigation. And I think anybody that's going to take an interest in this, they're going to take an interest knowing that you are being completely objective in everything that you're looking at. And you're not looking at it through the perception of your faith. So I think that that's a really good way to go about it.
But I wouldn't want people to think that I don't have faith and that I'm like as you said about the one guy, whether he's a wackadoo. My beliefs scripturally are extremely orthodox, but
sure.
The thing is, what I think the main problem that people have, people in the American church in particular, is that they look at one or two verses and build an entire thing about that, rather than looking at the Bible in its totality and the way it looks at spiritual warfare and the invisible realm. So to me, that's what it is. And it's like, there's really nothing in the New Testament like what happened in our house, because in the New Testament, it was almost always people being possessed. I'm not saying anyone. I think we were all under attack, but none of us were possessed in a traditional sense.
Right.
Entity at this house.
Well, I can guarantee you that you are going to get criticized, because if it's on the internet, you're always going to have at least one person that's a know-it-all, and they're going to take you to town for it, Sean.
I suspect that will happen, but it's like right now I'm still in process. So people, will try to pursue, what my conclusions are, if only by the questions I'm asking the people. But it's, I think I don't know exactly what I'm going to say, but I'm strongly convinced that this is not, that it's not as simple,
Yes.
It's like, I bet people would go to deliverance ministries and they're like, the evangelist cast the spirit, the demon of smoking out of me. I'm like, there's a demon of smoking, and you're a believer in the demon of smoking?
Didn't you know that?
Yeah. It's like, all they do is like make, every demon is just a personification of a sin.
Right.
And it essentially makes them devoid of personality and purpose.
Well, I know.
Also, the Lord, you got to take into account something was in that house.
Yeah.
And it wasn't there, it wasn't, the Lord may not have wanted it there, but he allowed it to be there. It was there.
But maybe it's
allow something unless it serves a purpose for something.
right. Well, maybe it's because he wants you to write about it. Maybe he wants you to expose it for whatever reason. Maybe it'll help somebody else going through the same thing. And I know personally, for me, I have a spirit of sugar and Diet Coke in me.
Yeah.
So I need to deal with that.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you visiting my show. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And I'm going to I will have links to your blog and other information because I think this is something that intrigues people. I think it intrigues people from all walks of life because it just always shows that there's something more than just what we can see, touch, feel, and smell. So tell everybody and I'll put it up too, but tell everybody where they can find your blog.
I will. I'll do that. But can I say one more thing? One of the main
sure.
When I said that the Lord said you wanted to write about it, that was not a condemnation in a sense. It was just an accurate statement, let us say.
Sure.
But one of the main reasons I never wrote about it was because particularly the Ouija board aspect of it, because at that time I thought the Ouija board was actually the start of it because I didn't have the knowledge that I have now of what it is. Is that I didn't want people to go like, wow, that sounds cool. I'm going to buy a Ouija board and see what happens,
Oh, yeah.
But it's sort of like people are doing that anyway, so at least I'm another voice of warning against it.
And I can second that warning because I've done it.
Yeah. And, and the fact is, at my grandmother's house, my sister brought this up in her interview. She used to have a Ouija board. She got rid of it once she heard about what, stories about it. But we used to have like kids seances when we were like 10 years old or something.
Yeah, we did all that too, which is horrible now when I think about it. But I made my own Ouija board because my mom was Catholic and there was no way she was allowing that in our house. And she found us playing with it one day. And man, we call her Old Irish. She's super calm, but when she blows her top, it's like the mafia boss, and that thing was gone quick, but it works. So I would second that. Do not buy a Ouija board. It is not a toy.
It is not a toy. It's like but it's the same as any other divination device. When you're opening yourself up for answers, and you're in a blind way, you just may get them. It may not.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Is there anything else that you would like to share with everybody before we wrap this up?
Well, I think that's about it. And hopefully maybe we'll talk again as I get more information.
Oh, real quick before I told everybody I would tell them what show is it that you work on or that you have worked on or that you're working on now?
You were probably talking about 90 Day Fiance, which I always used to talk about that I used to work on, but I don't work on 90 Day Fiance anymore.
Gotcha.
Now the show I'm working on, and I'm doing some things for preseason of a show on the OWN network called Love and Marriage Huntsville. I've been working on a lot of shows on the OWN network. I used to be a TLC guy, but now I'm doing.
Did you ever work on that Pimple Popper show or something like that?
Yes, I did.
That's it. That everybody talks about that show. I've never seen it, but I have three people that are like, oh, I love this show, and they start talking about it, and so then I get all uppity, and I'm like, well, I know somebody who worked on that show.
I did do the Pimple Bowl too. It was 6 hours. There was a bunch of episodes and some new footage and all.
Gross.
Of pimples. But when I saw the pilot of the show, I said, this show is definitely going to work because people have some disfiguring thing on their head. And it's like, on real medical shows, if you have cancer, it takes weeks. We have like 600 life. It takes a whole year to see. But you just walk in with this disfiguring thing that's making your life a living hell, and she just takes care of it, like in an hour, and you walk in this person happy, so it's like, and there's also that grossness factor, seeing that mashed potatoes you squeeze in.
And you get to edit that. Yeah. I got to. Well, tell everybody where we can find your blog.
It's at just type into Google Sean Paul Murphyville. Sean Paul Murphyville, one word. Like a whole village of Sean Paul Murphys. Sean Paul Murphyville.
Sean Paul Murphyville. And just for my viewers, real quick, I have to tell this like 30-second version of how I met you because it was so funny, the connection. Can I tell it real quick?
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay. So I'm a national contributor, and I had written an article about the true mission of the faith-based film community because there's some unrealistic things going on in faith-based films. They create things not realistic, and I kind of took them to task for that. I do screenwriting too. And it had evolved after an incident I had where one of my screenplays was turned down because it was too dark, even though like it would have been like PG-13. But anyway, so I wrote this article, and then there was a guy. He's a former mobster, and I love him. His name's Kenji Gallo. He was with the Colombo crime family. Hi, Kenji. If you watch this, but Colombo crime family. He actually was he was in that with that family for years, and he ended up becoming an informant, and was one of the reasons for the downfall of that crime family. And so he turned his life around. He went into hiding. He went into witness protection, and finally, this guy. If you ever see Kenji, look up Kenji Gallo. This guy is just completely. He's super smart, but just. This guy has to have no fear. Like, he came out of hiding. He's living out in the open, but somehow he met you. And so he had read my article, and he sent you my way about my article. And you had made a comment and left your blog. And usually I don't read the comments, but I wanted to see the temper of what people were saying about the faith-based film community. And so I happened to read yours, and I'm like, oh, and you were kind of reiterating the same thing. And so I found your blog, and I'm so glad I did, because you've completely mentored me. You've helped me so much. And so it's really cool that born out of some things like, getting rejected my screenplay because it was too dark. Like, and I would have never met you because I would have never read the article. So it was worth it.
Well, heaven forbid we would have a Christian film that actually reflected people's real life experiences.
Right, exactly.
And that blog, I would say, the blog that I responded to your blog with, which was already written, but I put on there, was probably Building the Faith-Based Ghetto. So if you just type in Google Building the Faith-Based Ghetto, that's my most popular blog, because a lot of people seek me out because of my Christian writing experience. And it really, I really got disillusioned with the Christian film writing business because it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. It was just about entertaining Christians,
Yes.
You can't, and we should have another discussion.
Let's do it. Let's actually do it. I think it would be phenomenal. We need to have a discussion about this because it is an important topic. So you will come back on my show and talk about it?
I'll come on anytime you want me.
Oh, I would love to. I always enjoy talking to you. I even answer my phone when you call.
Yeah. She said never call me because I don't always have it on. It doesn't ring, but strangely, she answers when I call.
I do. I'm like, oops. Usually I'm like, is this textable? But if it's Sean, I'm like, because you rarely call. So if you call, I'm like, oh, yay, Sean's calling. Well, I will talk to you soon. Thanks again. And again, everybody, I will put Sean's blog up and his other information. If you want to check that out, I suggest you follow his journey because he is still on it. And so you can actually finish going on his journey with him. So, and watch out for Chapel Street. I will update everybody when that comes out. Trust me, you're going to want to read that book.
July 2020.
July 2020, coming up soon, a few short months. I'll have to have you back on when that comes out. So,
okay,
but we'll do it beforehand too. But thanks, Sean. We'll talk to you later.
Okay, see you. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.